Hey everyone, I wanted to do a YouTube video on reversing a linked list, which is Leetcode problem 206. Plenty of people have done it, but I thought I would also record it for my own self-journey, and if anyone finds any value out of it, awesome. So, to solve the problem, let's first read it and actually understand what it wants from us. So we can see, given the head of a singly linked list, reverse the list and then return the reverse list. The reverse list, which will be the head, which would, at this point, once we reverse it, will be 5. And a singly linked list, for those who do not know, is a linked list that only has the next key, not the previous key. So it only knows what's in front of it, it does not know what's behind it. And so to solve this, I'm going to take an iterative approach, and I'm also going to use 2 pointers. And so if we're going to reverse this, so then we have 5 and then 1, we need to know what the previous node is going to be, and then what our current node is. And so how I'm going to solve this is we'll set previous to equal null, because at the end of the list, 5 is going to point to null. But if we're also reversing this, 1 will point to null. So then we'll have null here, which previous will point to. And then we'll also have, let me delete all this. We'll also have a pointer for current, which is, that is a awful arrow for current, which will point to the head. Now, mind you, when we disconnect this next and point to the previous from current, we now do not know, like, this is its own thing now. So we have 1 node, and then we have 4 nodes in another, like, bunch of memory that we just don't have, like, a reference to. So you actually need to also create some kind of temporary variable to then remember what the next node is. And so when we go through this, what ends up happening is that we create this temporary variable of next, point this to null, and then we take this previous and point it to the current node, which is 1. And then we'll move current to then also point to whatever the next node is, and then next will then get moved over to 3, and then we will take current.next, which is our pointer, and point it to the previous node. And once this is done, we'll then take previous and then move it over to the current node. And then we'll take the current pointer pointing to the current node and then point it to whatever the next node is. And you essentially just keep doing this until we hit where previous is pointing to 5 and then current is going to be pointing to null. And once we have this, we know that we are now off the list and previous will be the head, because we can see that 5 is going to be the start of the list, because we just essentially want to reverse this. So it's really messy, and I apologize for that. But let's see if I can explain it a little bit better, maybe in code as well. So we'll create a variable called previous, and we'll set that to null, because we need 1, which is going to be at the end, pointing to null. Then we'll set current to equal the head, which is going to be, in this case, 1. And then we'll create a while loop while current does not equal null, so we're not off the edge of the list. We have not fallen off. We want to set current.next. So let's think of it as like this arrow, and I'm going to start from 3. So 3 now is going to point to whatever the previous is. If I'm pointing current to 3, it means that the previous is 2. So then current.next will equal previous, and then previous will equal current. So what I've done here is that the current.next is pointing to the previous node, and then once we have this, then we'll move the previous, which is 2, and point it to 3. Now when we do this though, as I mentioned in the diagram, we have now disconnected this association with the next node. And so we need to end up remembering this node in memory. We need a reference to it. So we'll say let next equal current.next. So here in this loop, set the current node so we don't lose it, whatever the next node is of current, to next. Then we'll set current.next to point behind it. Then we'll set the node behind that, so 3 to 2, so the previous node. We'll then point to the current node, and then we'll set current to then point to next. So now current will then move to 4. So kind of in a diagram how I had it, we have here, we'll have P, and then C, and then with this next equals current.next, it'll be, if this is current, then .next is going to be 3. So this is how we know like what this node is after we set current.next to equal previous. So then we'll end up disconnecting this here, and now what's going to happen is 2 is going to point to 1. And then previous will now equal current. So now what we'll end up doing, oh, not cropping, dear Lord. We'll end up moving previous to now also point to current. And now current will now move and also point to the next node here. And then we'll loop again, and now next will then move from here. It'll move to here so we don't lose 4 in memory when we disconnect it using current.next to point to 2. And then previous will now move to point to 3. And then current can then move and point to 4. And then basically, as we're going through this, every single node, 1 will point to null, will move, 2 will point to 1, will move, 3 will point to 2, will move, 4 will point to 3, will move, 5 will point to 4, will move, and then we'll have null, so then current points to null, so now we're off the list, but since we keep moving P one node over, previous will now point to 5, so we know that previous is now the new head, because we were supposed to reverse it. And so now you can see, if this is one is now pointing to null over here, this is now the head, and this is the tail. So now, that means that we will return previous, since we know that previous is the head. So then we will return previous, and then I'm just going to submit the code, and if it's wrong, we'll debug it live. But I believe this should be good. So, yeah. Ooh, why did we actually, like 1 millisecond, I didn't expect that. Okay, there we go. That was super weird. I'm not really sure. It just kind of got funky, I guess. But yeah, hopefully everyone's learned something from this. I'm going to try to do these a little bit more frequently, kind of just for like my own self-documentation, but hopefully I provide some value. Any kind of comments, feedback, tips would be greatly appreciated. Take care and happy coding, everyone.